So very good afternoon, everybody, and thank you so much for joining promptly. Those who just joined, if you be kind enough to stay on mute whilst we're presenting, but please do use both the chat facility to put any questions in there, and I will make sure that we pose those to the panel a little later in the presentation. Today's session is really to try and unpick the world of journalism and the impact of data, both in the sense of perhaps validating stories that they're working on, but also to break news stories that are of interest to the public. And it's fit for purpose, whether you're in kind of radio, TV, online, print, all mediums of journalism is absolutely relevant to today's session. I'll be handing over shortly to my colleague, Tony Clark, who's going to give us an overview and set the scene on some programs that Cambridge Spark offer, both utilising something called the apprenticeship scheme or the apprenticeship levy, but also we do have a short course commercial offering as well that may be relevant for some listeners and some delegates on the call today. So we'll be comparing, contrasting both options for you. I'm then delighted to be joined by a panel that will be in conversation with who will share their experiences. Two colleagues from the BBC. So thank you very much to Hugh and Jonathan for giving their time today. And my colleague from Cambridge Spark, Miran, who will kind of give a perspective from a training perspective, so we can share the impact the training's actually had on people who are on programme at the moment, the sort of products they've actually been able to undertake and the return on investment, therefore, that their employers will have. As I said earlier, we'll then leave a good 15-20 minutes, hopefully at the end, for any questions that you have from the audience. So, just repeating what I said earlier, please do put those comments in the chat. And if they're relevant at the time, I'll direct them to the speaker. If not, if you kindly allow us to kind of save them to the end, that would be very much appreciated. So I'm just going to share my screen, and then I'll hand over to Tony. And Tony, if you want to let me know as and when you need me to kind of move the conversation on. So hopefully you can see that. So yeah, I'll go on mute and hand over to you.
Lovely. Thank you, everyone. So yeah, Richard, more than happy for you to move on to the next slide. So just to introduce ourselves, Cambridge Spark, we're an edtech company. We're the UK's specialist in data and AI, particularly in apprenticeships. So our mission is really to help organizations succeed in utilizing data and AI. We do that through supporting them developing capability and skills. And we really believe that everybody can stand to benefit from leveraging data. So we've developed a cutting edge end-to-end modularized curriculum, which has been developed by our expert faculty and covers everything from data literacy through to data analysis and data science and AI. Our curriculum is delivered in a multitude of ways. We have government-funded apprenticeships for people living in England. We have degrees and degree apprenticeships, tailored programs and short courses, and we deliver these globally. So Richard mentioned we have a couple of different options around the data-driven journalism program, which I'm going to talk about. But in terms of what we offer and what we do, you can see we are here to cater to everybody in an organization, whether you're a user of data and information through to being an analyst and preparing data at a regular interval, through to trying to make predictions using data and even creating machine learning models. So it's quite a broad spectrum in terms of what we do, but we are specialists in it. But today we're going to focus on how we can help those in journalism profession to actually leverage data to be better at their jobs, but also to create better stories and faster analysis. And yes, so as we mentioned, we're going to talk a bit about the level 3 apprenticeship, but we're also going to talk about the certificate, which is suited for anybody who cannot join the apprenticeship. So I think it was earlier this year, we'd been working with the BBC to collaborate to create the world's first data-driven journalism apprenticeship. We collaborated with both the BBC and also Cardiff University to enter a partnership to create this. And while it was initially intended for BBC employees and journalists. The opportunity, I think, for the whole journalism profession is significant. So this program is now available to any organization, any employee based in England or even internationally. And we're really excited to be able to bring this to you because it is absolutely a world first. And we've been running it for several months already for most this year. And we've seen some really great stories come out of it, which we'll be able to talk about later. So why is probably, what you might be thinking, but I guess there's a lot that's come from some of our apprentices and why learners are joining our program, whether it be from saving time when they're trying to create stories and work with data to being more rigorous. So ensuring that the stories they're creating are newsworthy, helping the audience understand the story better using data visualizations, graphics, through to the fact that actually through the apprenticeship, there is absolutely no cost and it's fully funded by the government. And I think another key element is actually having the confidence to actually engage with data. Too often, I think from what the journalists we speak to, there is a feeling or a fear about engaging with data because they don't understand it or feel confident. So just being able to build that up, and some of the stories that they've created have been incredible. There's been unmasking of potentially fraudulent activities through to being able to pick up on, all sorts of stories across a whole country because of looking at data. So there's really, really great ways to be able to use data and the skills that are covered in these programs to find and create stories. So what is the program going to cover and what are you going to get out of it? Well, there's a few key elements here. So I think the key thing to point out is actually what we're trying to do here is not teach journalists how to be journalists, but actually empower journalists who know how to be journalists with the skills needed to work with data and actually create and find more impactful stories. So the things we'll really cover are, one, preparing and analyze data efficiently. So talking about what we just discussed, it can be quite time consuming to work with data, but being able to do that quickly and efficiently can be a big step forward. Delivering data-driven insights, so being able to actually visualize information. So I think if anybody's ever looked at a spreadsheet full of data, very, very difficult to actually draw anything of value out of that. But as soon as you turn it into a visualization, it might just be a simple graph. Suddenly that brings it to life and actually can generate some really interesting insights. Improving productivity. So again, I think we all know that we live in a digital world and that's not going away. So being able to interact with that sort of information and digital information and data and future-proof your skill set, but also improve your productivity is going to be key. And as part of this, you'll work with pretty much industry standard tools. So the likes of Excel, Power BI, or Tableau, to make sure that you're actually really comfortable with the tools that are easily accessible and are going to help empower you in your day-to-day. So who's it for? Well, it's actually quite broad. So I think one of the key things to mention is that we have a similar program that is used for non-journalists, and actually the breadth of individuals that covers, because anybody can work with data, right? Data is everywhere, and actually it can help us answer questions, come up with new ideas, solve problems. So actually, as Richard mentioned, doesn't really matter in terms of what media you're working with, whether it be print, radio, TV, online. There is data everywhere around all of this, so you can absolutely be using these skills, these data skills, to help support. And in terms of your level, I think these job roles that you see in front of you are some of the ones that we've already got on the program. So you'll see it's quite broad in terms of who it could be suited to. So whether you're a journalist, researcher, editors, producers, ultimately there's probably data that you could be using to help you answer questions and actually present information and insights. So being able to engage with that and do something with it is going to be really, really key. Now, I did mention there's a couple of different routes here. So one of the great things that that's available to those who live and work in England is the apprenticeship levy and apprenticeship scheme. So there's two particular routes here. So you can access government funding through apprenticeships, and we have a really comprehensive program covering the data journalism curriculum. But if you're not meeting the requirements to access that funding, there's also an employer-funded certificate. So in terms of apprenticeship funding, there's a few specific requirements you need to meet. So you need to be employed in a relevant role in England, and by relevant role we mean you need to be able to access data. You need basic level of English and maths, so that's defined as sort of a GCSE grade C or above. You shouldn't have significant knowledge in the subject. So one of the key elements around what the government will fund for learning is, well, they don't really want to pay for somebody who already knows, you know, all the stuff on the course. So ultimately, if you are a data analyst or you're a data scientist, learning data related skills is probably not going to be something that is going to be valuable. And the last bit is, and this is actually a really great requirement, because these programs are transformational. They will take you into a different realm of skills and ability, but actually to access that and to be able to achieve that, there is a time commitment, and we want to make sure that actually you can dedicate that time, and your employer is committed to allowing you that time to actually be able to spend acquiring those skills, applying them, and really changing just how you work and how you think. So one of the key requirements of any apprenticeship is that you need to spend roughly 20% of your normal working hours. So it's a minimum of 6 hours a week on average, which you need to evidence, and that will basically say that you can access the funding. So if you meet all of those criteria, there's a good chance you'll be eligible for the government funding through the apprenticeship levy. And this means 100% of your training will be covered by that. Now, if you don't meet those requirements, there is absolutely the option to undergo or undertake these topics in this program. However, it will be funded by your employer. And this is the certificate program, which we'll talk about in a bit. So going to give you a quick overview of the data-driven journalism apprenticeship. So it's a 13-month program. When you complete that 13 months of learning, there's an endpoint assessment, which will lead to you getting a certificate from the Institute of Apprenticeships, which is actually a data technician certificate. But we'll cover roughly 13 to 14 modules, and we're going to take you from actually not much data experience or confidence through to basically almost a junior sort of data analyst, because you're going to be so confident about how to work with data, the value of it, how to source it, to enrich it, to be able to turn it into useful insights and visualizations, and then tell stories on top of it. So a key element around how you work with data is, yes, you need to be able to go into it, understand it, but then it's actually being able to communicate to others about the value that you've found in it. So we're going to take you all the way through from the value of data. We'll talk about digital transformation within news and journalism. We'll cover some basic numbers and statistics. We'll tell you how to source that data, prepare it, validate it, so that you know what you're putting out and the information you're gathering from it is valuable and correct. We'll tell you how to create charts and create data visualizations. We'll use dashboards, and then we'll also cover a couple more journalism focused modules around how to produce data journalism, but also how to work safely with data in news. So ultimately, the program is suited for any experienced journalism professional. So as I mentioned, we're not trying to teach you journalism here. It's about the data skills that will empower you as a journalist. You shouldn't have any significant background in data analysis. And ultimately, what you're going to get is that certificate at the end of the sort of 13 to 16 months. But in terms of how we deliver that, so you'll have virtual live instructor-led training and flexible e-learning as well. You'll work on some real-world simulated projects on our really engaging educate.ai platform. And I think one of the great things about the apprenticeship is you will get support for work-based applications. So it's not just about teaching you the skills and practicing them, it's about applying those in the workplace. So you will be supported by an expert to help convert what you've learned into real impact and stories through the data analysis that you're doing. So you'll be supported by one of our expert data mentors, but you'll also get a specialist L&D coach. So these are professional coaches who will support you on your journey to make sure that you're staying on track. Any problems or barriers, even with your manager, can be resolved. So they'll have regular progress reviews with you and your manager. And they're also there to support you if there's any soft skills or other challenges that you want to discuss. So they're really there to help support you through your journey. And as I mentioned at the end of the program, yeah, it's fine. At the end of the program, there will be an assessment and you will get that certificate. Thanks, Richard. So, and in terms of the non-apprenticeship route, so I think there's a couple of different reasons why you might want to look at this. One is around the eligibility criteria. So you might not be based in England. That's absolutely very common. You also might not want to commit to the same level. So one thing that does come with the apprenticeship is you have to evidence the learning. You have to make that commitment to that six hours a week, 20% of your time. This program gives you a bit more flexibility. So it still covers all of the core modules. You still get live teaching with recordings. There is all of the online practice and assessments, and we do still give you a certificate. So you're still getting a lot of elements that you would get on the apprenticeship. But it's suitable for anybody who's full-time, part-time, or even freelancers as well. You get those live workshops and they'll be delivered during normal working hours, and that's UK-based working hours. It's flexible, so you can actually learn at any time. So while we obviously run the live sessions, you can work flexibly on all of the other content. And you can be based anywhere. Now, sometimes what we will do is we'll run sessions either in the morning, UK mornings, or UK afternoons, and that obviously means anybody from sort of EMEA and also Asia, or even EMEA and the US can take part. The one thing we do need to mention is that there is a minimum number of participants to do that. So typically we would run this for an employer for a group of 10 or more. Great. So that was all from me. I'm going to hand over back to Richard, and I think there's some learner impact, but also a panel discussion that you can listen to.
Thank you very much indeed, Tony. Really good insight and an overview there. So we've kind of dotted a couple of case studies. As you saw, there was one in Tony's slide deck. There's another one here from Jim, just talking about some of the learns he's had on the program. Well, what I'd like to do now, I'm going to stop sharing and just invite, well, we can see them up on the screen there. Hugh, Miran and Jonathan, or John, delighted that you're able to join me today. Perhaps you can introduce yourselves individually. So perhaps, Jonathan, would you be good enough just to introduce yourself very briefly, and then we'll hand on to Miran, and then go over to Hugh. And I know, Hugh, you've got a couple of slides and a video you're going to share with us. So, Jonathan, share your experience.
Yes, everyone. Hi, my name's John Gibson. I'm one of Hugh's scheme specialists looking after the data-driven journalism and data-driven professional programme for the BBC, working in partnership with Cambridge Spark. So at the moment we have around 75 apprentices following the data-driven journalism programme since its inception last year. Our first graduates are starting to trickle through now, and this will be a rolling programme that we continue to use in the coming years.
Am I right in thinking you're a journalist yourself, Jonathan?
Yeah. So my background is a journalist. I'm an investigative journalist. Started with ITV far too many years ago to remember, and I've worked sort of in TV, radio, online in various roles since, and now work as part of Hugh's team.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, and thanks for your time again. Miran, you're part of the data mentor, head up the data mentor team. So perhaps you just briefly explain
Yeah,
your
that's
role.
fine. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. So I'm Miran. I'm the head of technical delivery here at Cambridge Spark. So I look after the mentors that Tony earlier mentioned in his presentation. So we're part of the team that will be supporting you from a technical perspective while you're on program with us. So we're very hands-on. So you'll be meeting us and getting technical support one-to-one from your assigned mentors. Will be one of my team who will be looking after you and giving you guidance and helping you build your what we call a portfolio of evidence, which you'll be building across the program and get some exciting projects together so you can demonstrate your new found skills that you're learning on program.
Thank you very much. I'll come back to both you, Jonathan and Baran, shortly. But Hugh, when you kind of introduce yourself, perhaps you'd just be kind enough to set the scene in terms of, you know, why you were keen to introduce this program to the BBC in the first place, and then over to you to kind of share your screen and walk us through a couple of slides. So over to you.
Great. Thank you, Richard. I'll just share my screen first before I get into all of that. Put the technicalities out of the way. So, yeah, I'm Hugh, working in the early careers and staff apprenticeships space in the BBC. I think that we, obviously, as a levy-paying employer, making a significant contribution towards the levy, the challenge that we were faced with was how you utilise the allowances that we receive through the apprenticeship levy and make it really effective and purposeful for the organisation. So we've over the last couple of years, we've been introducing over and above the traditional apprenticeships that we've offered for early careers. Those are the school, college and university leavers that typically come into the organisation. We've now started introducing apprenticeships as a mid-career development opportunity for staff across the organisation. When I looked at the portfolio of what we're offering in the domain, apprenticeships have been quite great for early careers coming into journalism and production making, but generally across the technology and corporate functions within our organisation, there's a lot more of a library of apprenticeships that are available. And I think that we needed to develop and be a little bit smart around how we needed to increase the availability of apprenticeships as a development tool for people within journalism and everything. Before I get on to that, it's quite mindful for those of us as employers to really understand what apprenticeships are. And as Tony has alluded to, that there's kind of a blended model that they're offering to cater for varying employers. But for us as an employer who are quite invested in apprenticeships, an apprenticeship is something that you've got to commit to. They're very defined, well documented, with a clear start and end time and duration to them that is no less than around about 13 months in duration, including an endpoint assessment at the end of that programme, which enables the individual to be validated following full completion of the apprenticeship. So the definition of what an apprenticeship occupation is detailed here, and it's around meeting full competency by the end of the apprenticeship. So by completing the apprenticeship, you become competent for that occupation that you're training in. I've just kind of pulled out here what is the published kind of route pathway for the journalism profession in the UK, or predominantly in England, for journalism, and there's only two. Generally, we've got the level 5 journalism apprenticeship that we have used as a bread and butter programme for early careers into BBC News and local and regional TV news and radio journalism. And we typically offer this apprenticeship to those who are coming out of FE college, or those who have done some but not all study towards the NCTJ accredited programme. And that has proved a very beneficial programme to us. We would typically recruit potentially up to 35 apprentices into that programme straight out of education into the organisation. And more recently has been the introduction of a new senior journalist level 7 apprenticeship, which is now available. A little bit more deeper, thinking, deeper responsibility, leading assignments, commissioning a little bit more within the journalism and news development field. But in general, when I looked at this, in terms of an apprenticeship opportunity, you kind of enter the occupation, but in terms of that further progression, unlike a lawyer or an engineer or an accountant, where there's really defined ways for you to accredit yourself and professionalize within those industries. For journalism, it's about time in the role and the experience that you get in the role. But with COVID and the pandemic, and as Tony alluded to, there's a lot of data out there, and we have these subsets of data science teams, data journalism units within many of our organizations, and that's all great and well for the well thought out and very planned news stories and development that we're doing and analysis. But for the day-to-day stuff, those rolling news channels, the rolling news environment, the availability of a subset of apprenticeships available to staff to develop and get the skills whilst utilising the apprenticeship levy allowances as a development tool was lacking. There are other apprenticeships that are available to people within the journalism kind of portfolio where you may want to enhance your skills in leadership and in management and operations and strategy. So there are apprenticeships there for them. They're not necessarily taught around the constraints of BBC News, but you apply that in your job depending on the varying role that you do. And there are others associated with those support roles that are around you in such as production assistants, broadcast assistants, and technical operations and such forth. So I started looking at the kind of data analysis and the data science subset of apprenticeships that have been there generally for the technical kind of community and the roles that we've got in our organizations with data scientists and engineers within the BBC. And there was an apprenticeship there which was called the data technician, and generally it was a very light foundational way for someone to develop digital and data skills to sort, format and present data securely. So putting our thinking cap on and approaching a couple of training providers, including Cambridge Spark and Cardiff University, we looked at contextualizing the training in there to see if we could develop a solution that could help journalists who are experienced and already kind of qualified. So many journalists right now, if they were to present themselves for the level 5 or level 7 journalism, they may already be meeting the requirements for that apprenticeship standard. So their eligibility, there's a potential 50-50 kind of roulette game as to whether they'll be accepted onto the programme based around having 10-15 years worth of experience. So the real utility belt that these journalists can gain is around that more foundational learning around data and digital tools that can help them enhance the way that we're developing stories. So that's where we went, and that's what we've kind of worked on. There's further progression in routes, and as Tony has alluded to, around the audience, around data and how that pyramid of occupations that we have in the organisation, how far you can take it, is that beyond this programme, you could further develop yourself around data and perhaps contextualise that around journalism a little bit more. So after all of this thinking and bringing together Cardiff University as well as Cambridge Spark to kind of build this programme together, this is kind of the nice little swanky video that I use to promote it internally with our journalists to encourage them to take on pretty much a Microsoft Excel course. There you go, Richard. Oh, I want to play that again. Sorry about that.
Thank you very much indeed. Lovely introduction. I don't know if you want to come back up. And Hugh and Jonathan, just talk a little bit. I think, Jonathan, you said you'd had people got 75 on program now. So what impact? What have you seen? What sort of things? How has it helped the organisation produce even better content?
So I think one of the main drivers and one of the motivations for people is just to become more confident in handling data. The BBC is a huge news organisation. It deals with a lot of story churn. It has to find and validate a lot of data in very short periods of time. And what we were finding across the organisation is that there was hesitancy among journalists. They lacked the confidence in being given a data set, be it from the ONS or from another data source, and just having the confidence to be able to scrutinise that data in a way that they could draw out the lines of journalistic value quickly, effectively, and suited to the area or organisation that they were working for within the BBC. So, for example, there's much more of a focus now on story sharing or using a single data source to provide content for a range of outlets. And if you can imagine a huge ONS data set that perhaps provides data on a region by region basis, this is an opportunity for a journalist to be based centrally, to grab some data, to interrogate that data, to interpret that data, and then provide stories, not just for a single news outlet, but for outlets across the country. So providing very, very cost-effective data stories by gaining the confidence to be able to handle that data in the first place. I think one of the other things as well that's important is that lots of journalists we have in specialist data units, all they do is work with data day to day. And so there was a little bit of a disconnect between those data specialists and the rest of the journalists that we employ. And we employ many, many hundreds who wanted those essential skills but didn't work in data as a specialism. And so this apprenticeship is a great way of bridging that gap. You talk about some of the stories that have come out of it. Let me give you an example. Joan, who was the lady featured in the slide deck that Tony had earlier, she is based in Coventry in the West Midlands. Last year, it was this Coventry City of Culture, and a lot of effort and a lot of resource was put into hosting that event. Joan, as a consequence of doing the data-driven journalism apprenticeship, was able to really kind of scrutinise some of the claims that were being made by the organising body about levels of engagement, particularly with younger audiences, the number of children, for example, that were attending events, and really able to ask some quite probing questions of organisers based on the apparent disconnect between the claims that they were making around audience attendance levels, for example, and the number of individuals that had actually taken part in events that that body had organised. So there are so many kind of advantages of being able to become data confident. And certainly that's one of the things that I've really noticed from the journalists on the course as we've been kind of running it for the last 18 months or so now. The fact that people who were kind of almost scared of data and were almost kind of not wanting to get involved with a data story at all, and now actively embracing data stories. They have a relish for handling that data and want to be able to use it to its full potential. So I think that's the real benefit that I've seen.
Thank you. I'm kind of really interested in this kind of efficiency side, but I guess from my perspective as a consumer of news, and I love following all of the kind of news channels. It's kind of it's everywhere now, isn't it? 24/7. Not like when I was growing up, you go and buy a paper, and if you're fortunate enough, you had a TV and listen to the radio. Now it's 24/7, isn't it? But one of the problems with that, I guess, is the validity of it, because fake news and knowing what's correct and knowing what's a trusted news story is obviously something that the BBC has a kind of proud reputation of. So has that kind of helped from that perspective as well?
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't, as you say, kind of validation of data, particularly for the BBC, is critically important, not least because of some of those factors that you mentioned around fake news, and that requirement, that constant news churn, whereby people are expecting to be able to kind of get facts and figures at a moment's notice 24 hours a day, means that reliance on being able to kind of interpret data quickly, but more to the point, accurately, becomes more and more imperative. And that ability to give journalists who are not data specialists those skills that enable them to get confident with data will really make a difference across our newsrooms, both at network level and embedded within the communities that we serve right across the UK, I think.
Thank you. Miriam, bringing you into the kind of the conversation, perhaps you'd be kind of just to share a little bit from the Cambridge Spark perspective, both how the kind of the training is delivered and made pertinent to the audience, but also perhaps you get the pleasure of seeing the portfolios and seeing some of the projects that people are working on. So perhaps you could share some insights on that as well. So a couple of questions there, how the training is kind of encapsulated and made appropriate, and also some of the projects and the projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Yes. So our training is structured in a way. So we have a sort of a model where we do a half-day lecture, live lecture with the sort of subject matter experts through those modules that Tony showed you earlier on. So you can see you will have like a proper session, an interactive session, you know, where, you know, you're learning, you're getting that learning delivered to you, and you're deep diving into a topic and getting that expertise. But then after that, you know, you follow that up with what we call skills practice assignments, which allow you to work through a set of assignments using our sort of learning platform that we have called educate.ai, and you get an opportunity to then practice and hone in on some of those skills, and actually sort of practice through the sort of techniques with the data, manipulating it and whatever. And then the third and probably the most important element is that kind of practical application where you get to start to build a portfolio, build a story, and sort of put that down onto paper, showing and demonstrating these new skills that you've managed to develop. And I just want to show you quickly some of these, a couple of examples of the portfolios that some of our learners have put together, and just a quick whiz through, but the kind of sort of output that you'll have from this apprenticeship to see the kind of stuff. So if you'll bear with me a second, I'll just share my screen. I'm just going to share this, and hopefully you can see. Can everyone see that? Hopefully. Yeah. And
yes, we can.
Here. So this is a portfolio. I'll just start at the beginning, so you can I'll just quickly whiz through up to the beginning. So what this is like the apprenticeship portfolio that one of our journalists, Rob Lawrence in this case, has built. And what this is a compilation of the kind of projects that he's been working on. You can see here there's a series of tasks that he's worked on and stories that he's worked on, and he's using them in you know, to help demonstrate how he's applying these skills. One of the particular ones I want to look at is this one here, which is looking at ambulance services and the strain that's come under, you know, during COVID, and also through the sort of austerity and everything else. So if we just quickly scroll down, you'll see a lot of examples of the kind of work that he's been doing. You can see there's a lot of work here, obviously, but just quickly move up the screen. And what he's done here on this project is he's looking at this ambulance service data and looking at the performance and how the pressures on the NHS have been big. But the big thing that you'll see here that he's using the data to geographically demonstrate with sort of fancy and interesting and interactive visualizations to demonstrate, you know, the impact, and these are the kind of things that you'll be using in your stories and showing what the impact has been with, and he's showing how he's manipulating that data, how he's validating that data as well, right to the granular level, you know, right from the source data right through to testing and checking, and then presenting that data in a way that is, you know, palatable and can be shown and shared to tell that story properly. But you can see all the kind of graphs and charts and plots and all the different tools and exciting techniques that he's going to be using. Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Perhaps another question, and if you'd be so kind to answer, Miran.
Yeah.
Hugh alluded to there's this kind of couple of month process where the learners go through what's called an endpoint assessment. Do you want to kind of bring that to
Yeah,
life?
that's right.
There's
So,
lots of acronyms and the mystery in apprenticeships.
sure.
What's involved with an endpoint assessment?
Yeah, so 12 months of your learning will be through modular learning, but the last 3 months of your learning will be what we call the endpoint assessment process. This is where you get certified as a data technician, as we call it, which is the certification from the Apprenticeship Institute. And part of that is 2 key assessment methods. One assessment method is this type of portfolio that I've been showing you. So you will build up this portfolio of evidence and present that to an endpoint assessment, independent assessment organization, not Cambridge Spark. And they will sort of assess your competency based on looking at your portfolio and also talking to you about it and establishing your competency from seeing how much you've learned against the sort of the what we call the standards of knowledge, skills and behavior that are needed for this apprenticeship. And then on the other assessment method, the second assessment method, you'll be asked to demonstrate and work through some exercises which are sort of contextualized to where you're working, but it gives you an opportunity to sort of demonstrate your skills in a live sort of arena. So where you'll be monitored and be asked questions about how you're doing a piece of work and what's your thought process behind that and how you're doing it. And based on those 2 assessment methods combined is how your grading is ultimately determined.
Fantastic. So it's an independent body. So the employer gives them the great experience. We give them the relevant, along with Cardiff University, the relevant training, and then an external organisation kind of assesses it. Hugh, Jonathan, coming back to both of you, one of the, either from, I guess, a line manager perspective or indeed from the learner perspective, how do they kind of balance the time between doing the day job? And let's face it, your profession is all about deadlines, isn't it? It's all about getting yes, an accurate and credible story, but you've got deadlines to kind of hit. So how do they manage to marry those 2 kind of pressures of doing the apprenticeship, but also having enough time to create great stories for the BBC? Hugh, perhaps you first.
It's a challenge. I mean, obviously, there's a mandatory level to those 6 hours at least that we need to allocate for any apprenticeship learner to go off the job and to go off and attend studies and to expand on the knowledge training and everything that you're providing. That side, which is crucial, and I think that every single manager or anyone who is endorsing and supporting someone going on to the apprenticeship has to are required to commit to. The employer, the BBC, is committed to this, so we make it work. And the interesting thing, which came into the design of this apprenticeship, was I had to use news channel, BBC News Channel, 24/7 operating team that has got night workers, weekend shift workers, as well as people working during the day, as well as some of our smaller radio offices, whether in Norwich or in around Bristol or in Gloucestershire. And in those teams, you have a very tight, smaller campus with a limited pool of staff who are able to freely have that time to come off. So we've developed a really agile and with Cambridge Spark's kind of digital tool and delivery set, it has made it really quite accessible. And by us developing a way that teaching is either on Thursdays or Tuesdays at the moment, or maybe a Wednesday, it enables a very small office to allow up to 2 staff to go on the programme at any given time, and it shouldn't have too huge an impact on the operational rosters and everything that we've got with the staff, as well as very similar situation for those who are working in a more 24/7 factory, such as New Broadcasting House. So we've got quite an agile programme here, and I think with that other commercial offering of the pay-as-you-go kind of route with the foundation certificate programme, which is the non-apprenticeship, We've got an international community of staff, particularly in World Service and BBC monitoring. So that kind of opportunity has made it quite accessible for that very fluid and access whenever you want kind of training program, which is quite useful. But John can go a little bit on about the day-to-day kind of solutions that can be applied to make this kind of work.
Yeah, I mean, I think, Richard, from my perspective, it's really important that both the apprentice themselves and me as the scheme manager for the programme have that regular dialogue and buy-in with the line manager. It's important that the line manager sees this programme for what it is, which is a development opportunity. I also think certainly during the initial couple of months when somebody signs up and is starting the programme, there we have to manage expectations as well, in the sense that we're not expecting journalists to start this program on day one and on day two to be providing these huge, fantastic data stories. But within a couple of months, the managers in the newsroom, the rest of the team, will be noticing the difference, because their confidence, the journalist's confidence in terms of handling data, instead of being the person that sits at the back of the room when the data story comes in, is actually kind of putting their hand up and saying, well, I've got this one, I can deal with this one. That is something that will be of benefit not just to the line manager and to the apprentice themselves, but the whole of the team. So I think it's very much around making sure that what is seen as an individual development opportunity is also something that will bring benefit to the whole team, and in doing so recognise that the learner also needs to be given that time away from the day job, that the minimum of the 6 hours a week that Hugh mentioned there, to make sure that they're able to get the best out of this programme and to be able to start delivering the stories that they will be able to deliver as part of being on this programme. So it's about a shared experience. One of the great things I think now is that as more and more people are coming onto the programme, is that there are also learners from outside the BBC that are joining it as well. So this becomes much more of a network of data savvy journalists that can build connections, not just across the BBC, which in itself is a huge organisation, but with that wider journalism community. And with those connections, of course, come other opportunities for collaboration around stories and different things like that, in the way that the BBC already operates a collaborative model through the shared data partnership. So lots of opportunities there, but I just want to make sure and certainly emphasize this to BBC line managers, that this is a learning opportunity. It's something we want you to really buy into and encourage and support your member of staff doing, and that the benefits will hopefully then be seen for the team as a whole.
So it's like any new skill, really, isn't it, Jonathan? You kind of invest time in getting better at something, but you get that payback, you get that return on investment. You know, in your case, you know, the great examples of efficiency improvements or day cost savings, be able to kind of spread a regional story nationwide and those sorts of things. So thank you very much indeed. I'm conscious we've got about 5 or 6 minutes of people's time left before they can have a well-earned cup of tea. So I'm just going to have a quick look at the chat. I think a couple of comments kind of did come in. Just see if there's anything that people can kind of comment on. So if anybody wants to come off mute and ask a question, then please do. But yeah, I think there was a question there which you've answered beautifully, Jonathan, around the effectiveness of stories, which I think you've kind of covered. A few people there asking for the recording. But as I said, if there's anybody who'd like to specifically ask a question, then here's your opportunity in the last kind of few minutes to do so. So yeah, please do come off mute if you have a question, or put your hand up if you have a question you'd like to ask.
Just while people are thinking about that, Richard, I'm just picking up on the point that Gunan made about she's a presenter producer for the African Caribbean specialist programs, uses data. We've got a number of learners that work for the BBC monitoring service in the UK, a number of journalists that work for World Service as well. And there has been a real desire to be able to kind of take those data skills and apply them to the work that they do. We have a learner at the moment who works for the Swahili service, who is just about to graduate actually, and she has really talked about the value that this program has provided in terms of being able to scrutinize the data that comes from governmental or non-governmental organisations in the area in which she works, and just be able to kind of take a much more informed view when she is then going back to organizations that have issued data, because she's been able to learn the skills to interrogate that data. She's in a much better, more informed position to be able to say, hang on a minute, I don't think your data actually kind of says what you're saying to me. What it actually says or points to is this, this, and this. And that ability to have that confidence to be able to kind of scrutinize the data and then to hold people to account is a real advantage that she's gained from coming on this program.
Yes, it's almost knowing what question to ask, I guess, isn't it? Because if you're not familiar with the data set, you don't quite know what questions you need to ask. I really like that example. So thank you very much for sharing. So I think that looks like we've kind of answered the questions that people had. It just remains for me to thank participation of obviously Miran, Hugh, Jonathan, and you heard from Tony earlier in terms of presenting. I'll stop recording in a second, but thank you very much. Anybody who wants the slides, I think a couple of people have put it in the chat facility. I'll make sure I get those out to people in due course. But have a good rest of the day, and thank you very much for your participation this afternoon. Thank you, everybody.